So if you're a father and you're thinking about your grandchildren, you now want to give as much power as possible to your daughter or to your daughter-in-law to make sure that she has the power in the house to force the girl, to force her husband to invest in the children so that your grandchildren will actually be healthy to take advantage of these opportunities. And the more growth in the economy, the stronger this mechanism. Another reason why you might see something like that happening is that men are both husbands and father. And maybe as husbands, they don't care much about their wives. Maybe they do, but I assume they don't. Then they really want the power for themselves. On the other hand, as fathers, they care about their daughters. And so the more you care about your children, and you're going to care more about them when the economy is growing, the more you care about your children, the more you want to transfer into them, you want to be sure that your daughter is not going to be expropriated by your son-in-law. So you might want to relinquish some of your rights in order to make sure that your daughter gets some rights. So for these two reasons, two classes of reasons, and maybe other, we might think that as an economy grows, there might be a reason for men to be willing to give more rights to women. And there is some suggestive evidence from the US states that the states who grew faster are the states who relaxed those, who gave these rights, voting rights, property rights, etc., to women earlier. Now, all of this is quite encouraging. So if it was all I would have to say, maybe I would be done, or maybe I would have picked another topic, because in some sense it would be, I would then only be worried about making sure there is growth and development. But unfortunately, I'm not convinced that development will be enough to bring about equality between men and women in every dimensions. There are some indicators that are a bit worrying. The first one is that the sex ratios keep worsening in China and in the north of India. For example, in China, the sex ratio was 53% in 1990. That means there were 53% boys. And it increased to 57% in 2000. 57% of kids born in the 2000 cohorts are boys. That's a lot of missing girls right there. India, in particular the north of India, also shows a worsening trend, at least till recently. Labor market discrimination is an area where some progress is being made, but it seems to be eventually reaching some plateau. There is a glass ceiling that persists in many countries, in particular rich countries as well. Political leadership is also a place where women still lag behind men, even in rich countries. The number of women in parliament was 9% in 1997 and 19% in 2010. That's an increase, but that's not a very fast increase, and it's still quite low. And moreover, most of this growth between 9% and 19% is accounted by the fact that more and more countries establish some system of quotas. So for example, you have to have 50% of women in parliament, or you have to have 30% of women in parliament. And most countries with at least 30% of women in parliament have a quota system. So it doesn't seem that the political process left to its own will find a way to elect women. So what are some reasons why this inequality might persist? One first reason is that suppose that there is a taste for discrimination. So the arguments I gave before is maybe this taste will relax. But on the other hand, what happened also with economic development is that maybe it becomes cheaper to indulge in some dimension of gender discrimination. For example, if you really didn't want to have a girl in China or India some years ago, you would have to commit infanticide, which most people are probably quite reluctant to do. But now it's not very difficult. You can get sex-selective abortion. It's illegal in India. But in the street of Delhi, on the divider of the roads, you had these little ads that you could see, which was said, better pay 500 rupees now than 50,000 later. 500 rupees is the cost of a sonogram. 50,000 is by the estimate of the people who wrote this ad, how much parents would have to pay in dowry. So that becomes easier and easier to have sex-selective abortion, and when that becomes easier, people do it. And you do continue to see sex-selective abortion in the US and in Canada today. And in countries like Taiwan, for example, when abortion becomes legalized, the number of girls born went down tremendously. So that's one example where, in some sense, development goes the wrong way. Economic development goes the wrong way. If we just count on that, we probably have fewer and fewer girls until something dramatic happens. There are reasons also why discrimination in labor markets, discrimination in education, discrimination in politics might continue. One is what the psychologist Mazarin Banerjee has called implicit bias. The idea is that a lot of the biases that are present in society against women might not be people might not even be fully aware of them. So for example, people might implicitly associate women with family and men with career. And women themselves might have this bias, and men have this bias, possible employers have this bias. And so in every single small decision of your life, this implicit bias is influencing what you're going to do. And they have no particular reason to go away on their own, and no particular reason to follow development. Moreover, when you have this kind of implicit bias, they can be reinforced by the fear of those bias. So this is something that the Stanford psychologist has called stereotype threat. Stereotype threat is when a group identifies with a particular bias and think that they identify with it so much that it affects their own performance. Here is one example of an experiment that Claude Steele and his associate conducted in Stanford. They asked students, girls and boys, who are good at math to take an exam, very difficult math questions. So when you do that, boys do better than girls. Now take another group of kids, randomly selected, and give them the exact same test and say, well, you may have heard that boys are better at math than girls, but that does not apply to this particular test. That's it. That's your intervention. And then have them do the test. And then girls do as well as boys. So that suggests that the interpretation they give is that boys and girls start struggling on the math. They both start struggling because these are difficult exams. The boys struggle, and then they say, I need to overcome that. The girls struggle and say, oh, I'm a girl, I'm lousy at math. That's why I can't do it. And so you go, that divergence gets there. So when you have phenomenon like that, then these kind of things also self-reinforce, such that indeed girls become less good at math because of that, and then they know that they are less good at math, etc., etc. So there is no reason for it to go away on its own unless you intervene. In this case, the intervention is particularly easy, but in some cases it might take more work. Another dimension is negotiation and competition. Women are less likely to negotiate aggressively, in particular for themselves. Women are less likely to want to compete, and they do less well in competitive situations. And that is true. You know, where this comes from, we don't know. That might be culture, that might be what's appropriate. What we know is that it doesn't go away, because that's still there. All of this research was carried in rich countries, and you might expect that it's there with a vengeance in poor countries. So these are all reasons to think that gender discrimination is not going to go away on its own. And another reason why it might not go away on its own is that you can have a reinforcement of taste discrimination, which is in general, say, men would rather have men lead than women lead, and statistical discrimination, which is even if they were equally happy to have men and women lead, they think that women are incompetent, and they want competent people.